The North Atlantic, March 1940. Something's killing Britain, and it isn't what you think. No panzer divisions. No screaming Stukas. Just silence. The kind that swallows ships whole and leaves nothing behind but ripples on dark water. Every week, convoys steam out of Halifax, New York, Boston. Hulls packed with grain, ammunition, medicine, steel. And every week, fewer come back. The math is simple and terrifying. In 4 months, over 250 Allied vessels just vanish. That's not a number on some war room chart. That's entire crews. Families waiting for men who'll never dock again. Cargo holds full of food that'll never reach a single British table. Here's the thing people forget about islands. Britain can't feed itself. 55 million tons of imports every year just to keep the lights on and bellies full. The farms back home? They cover maybe 30%. Without those convoys pushing through the Atlantic swell, the clocks start ticking. Months, maybe less, before the whole nation starves. Not because of tanks rolling through the countryside. Because of what's waiting beneath the waves. Admiral Karl Dönitz knows exactly what he's doing. His U-boats hunt in packs now. Wolf pack, they call it. Coordinate, surround, overwhelm. These submarines don't play by gentlemen's rules. They surface at night when British sonar goes blind, then hammer torpedoes into freighters that never see them coming. One fish can crack a 10,000-ton hull like an eggshell. If the crew's lucky, they've got maybe 90 seconds to hit the lifeboats before the Atlantic takes them. Water that cold doesn't negotiate. The men running those convoys face choices no one should have to make. Push the throttle and leave the slow ships behind to die alone? Zigzag and burn fuel you can't replace? Stay tight for mutual protection but give the wolves a bigger target? Every call is a coin flip between bad and worse. And Winston Churchill, the man who will stare down the Blitz without flinching, later admits that U-boats were the only thing in the entire war that genuinely scared him. Think about that. Invasion fleets massing across the Channel, cities burning, France collapsing. What keeps him awake? The hunters he can't see. By spring, Britain's merchant fleet is dying faster than the shipyards can rebuild. The Royal Navy's stretched so thin you can see through it. Destroyer captains are running their crews into the ground, sprinting from one convoy to the next. Never enough warships to cover the gaps. Some convoys cross with 1, maybe 2 escorts trying to shield 30 or 40 cargo ships. It's not protection. It's theater. And the Germans are getting cocky. They share intelligence now. One U-boat shadows a convoy through daylight, radioing position reports. Then when the sun drops, 5 or 6 submarines converge for what the Kriegsmarine calls Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. For Allied sailors, there's nothing happy about watching your ship brothers burn on the horizon while you pray your hull isn't next. But here's what's worse. The wolf packs aren't even Britain's biggest problem. November 21st, 1939. HMS Gypsy, a British destroyer, cuts through the Thames estuary. Home waters, Royal Navy territory, swept for mines so many times the charts are worn through. Then the ship just explodes, no torpedo wake, no periscope, no warning. Gypsy's gone in minutes and nobody has the first clue why. 3 days later, it happens again. Merchant ship SS Terukuni Maru, same area. Then another. And another. Vessels are detonating in harbors, river mouths, channels that should be safer than your bathtub. The blasts are catastrophic. Bows ripped clean off, ships snapping like dry kindling, entire crews vaporized. By December, a dozen ships have been destroyed in British coastal waters, and the Admiralty is completely lost. This isn't torpedo work. There's no U-boat activity in these shallows. Too much patrol coverage, too much risk. These aren't the old contact mines either. British minesweepers have dragged these routes again and again. Found nothing. Ships are just sailing along, minding their business, then ceasing to exist in a column of spray and shattered steel. Panic sets in. Captains who've faced U-boat wolf packs without breaking are now terrified of their own ports, because at least with submarines you know the enemy. You can zigzag, drop depth charges, fight back, but this is fighting smoke. Crews start calling the Thames estuary the death trap, and some merchant captains flatly refuse orders to sail certain routes. The losses keep stacking. December bleeds into January. Then HMS Nelson, 45,000 tons of battleship, the kind of vessel that's supposed to be untouchable, hits something off Scotland and barely crawls into port with her bow hanging by rivets. If capital ships aren't safe, nothing is. Then comes the break that changes everything. November 23rd, 2 days after Gypsy went down. Someone spots a German plane dropping something by parachute into the Shoeburyness mudflats at low tide. When the water recedes, British bomb disposal experts wade out into the muck. What they find sitting there, half buried, is a mine unlike anything the Royal Navy's ever seen. No contact horns, no visible trigger, just sitting there like a patient predator. Lieutenant Commander John Ouvry and his team spend hours examining it, knowing one wrong move turns them into vapor and the answer they need into scrap metal. They're working with freezing tidewater creeping back toward their boots, racing the ocean itself. What they discover inside sends shockwaves through the Admiralty. Literally. This mine doesn't wait for contact. It doesn't need any physical touch at all. Inside the casing sits a magnetic sensor, feeling for the metal hull of passing ships. When a vessel sails overhead, the mine detects that mass of steel and iron, then detonates. The Germans have weaponized physics. Suddenly, the whole nightmare makes sense. The shallow water attacks, harbor explosions, minesweepers sailing right over the damn things without triggering them. Britain isn't just fighting submarines anymore. It's fighting an invisible enemy that turns every ship's own hull into a death warrant. The captured mine lands on the desk of Charles Goodeve, and honestly, he's the last person you'd expect to save the Royal Navy. He's a Canadian chemistry professor who came to Britain on an academic fellowship and got swept up in the war before he could leave. He's not military, never served on a ship. He's a scientist who ended up in something called the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, basically where the Admiralty dumps weird ideas and the odd people who think them up. When the magnetic mine problem reaches Goodeve in early 1940, most naval officers are thinking conventionally. Better minesweepers, thicker armor, more careful mapping, sensible approaches from men who've spent their lives at sea. Goodeve looks at the whole thing sideways, because he understands something the admirals don't. This isn't a naval problem. It's a physics problem. The mine doesn't care about armor or tactics. It's responding to magnetic fields. Every ship is essentially a giant floating magnet. Steel hulls get magnetized during construction. All that hammering and welding and shaping aligns the iron molecules with Earth's magnetic field. Even after launch, that signature stays. A beacon screaming, "Detonate here," to any mine listening. Goodeve's solution sounds completely insane when he first proposes it. He wants to wrap entire ships in electrical cable and run current through them. Thousands of feet of wire coiled around hulls, powered by onboard generators, creating an electromagnetic field that cancels out the ship's natural magnetism, make ships magnetically invisible. The Admiralty's initial reaction is about what you'd expect. Senior officers who've commanded fleets are being told by a university professor to turn their warships into floating electromagnets. Some think he's joking. Others wonder if he's been into the medical brandy. One admiral reportedly asks him straight out if he's drunk. But Goodeve's got the math. He explains it like this: every magnetic field has polarity, north and south. The ship's hull creates one field. Generate an equal and opposite field around it, and they cancel each other out. Same principle as noise-canceling headphones, except instead of sound waves, you're erasing magnetic signatures. To the mine sensors, the ship simply wouldn't exist. It would sail right over the weapon and the magnetic trigger would never activate. There's just one tiny problem. Nobody's ever tried this on anything bigger than a rowboat. Goodeve's proposing to degauss, that's the technical term, every single vessel in the British fleet. Battleships, destroyers, cargo ships, tankers, trawlers. Thousands of vessels, each one requiring custom calculations, precise wire placement, careful calibration. The logistics are staggering, and Britain doesn't have time. Ships are exploding daily. If the Royal Navy spends months testing, there might not be a fleet left to save. So despite the skepticism, despite the impossible scale, despite it sounding like something from a Jules Verne novel, the Admiralty gives Goodeve permission to try. Because honestly, what else have they got? Here's what makes the magnetic mine so brilliantly evil. Earth itself is a giant magnet. When you build a ship, hammering steel plates and bending metal into shape, you're doing all that construction inside Earth's magnetic field. The iron molecules gradually align themselves like tiny compass needles. The ship becomes permanently magnetized. This signature's strongest at the bow and stern, where the hull curves most dramatically. A typical 10,000-ton freighter creates a magnetic field detectable from 30 feet away. Battleships with their massive armor, even stronger. The field doesn't shut off, doesn't disappear in fog or darkness. It's always there, radiating like a beacon. German engineers understood this perfectly. Their mind sits on the seabed, patient and silent. Inside its waterproof casing, a magnetometer monitors the ambient field. When a ship passes overhead, the magnetometer detects the change. Once it crosses the preset threshold, the circuit closes, current flows, and 650 pounds of high explosive turn the seafloor into hell. The beauty of the design, from Germany's perspective, is that it's practically impossible to sweep. Traditional mines bob near the surface on cables. You can cut those cables or detonate them with gunfire, but magnetic mines sit directly on the bottom in shallow water. Minesweepers sailing overhead just trigger them like any other ship. Britain lost several minesweepers this way before they figured it out. Goodeve's degaussing solution attacks the problem at its source. If you can't hide the metal, cancel out its magnetic field. The technique requires wrapping the ship in a long cable loop. Sometimes one loop around the entire hull, sometimes multiple loops at different heights. When electrical current flows through this cable, it generates its own magnetic field. The trick is getting the polarity right. If the ship's hull has a magnetic north pole at the bow, you run current through the degaussing cable in a direction that creates a south pole at the same location. The two fields interact and neutralize each other. Do this correctly around the entire hull, and the ship's magnetic signature drops from 30 feet to just a few inches. Too weak to trigger the mine's sensors. But here's where it gets complicated. Every ship is different. A destroyer built in Glasgow has a completely different magnetic signature than a freighter built in Newcastle. The intensity varies based on steel composition, construction methods, how long ago it was built, even which direction it faced in the shipyard. You can't just wrap standard cable around every vessel and call it done. Each ship needs individual measurement, custom calculations, precise calibration. Goodeve realizes he's not just solving a physics problem. He's trying to reinvent ship construction for the entire British fleet, and he needs to do it in weeks. The first test happens in January 1940 at HMS Vernon in Portsmouth. Goodeve's team selects a small minesweeper, HMS Board, as their guinea pig. They spend 3 days measuring the ship's magnetic field from every angle using sensitive magnetometers, borrowed from university physics departments. Then they wrap 2,000 feet of heavy electrical cable around the hull in a carefully calculated pattern, connect it to a generator, and flip the switch. The results are stunning. The ship's magnetic signature drops by over 90%. When they sail HMS Board over test magnetic sensors, the instruments barely register anything. It's as if the ship has vanished from the magnetic spectrum. Goodeve's crazy idea actually works, but success creates its own nightmare. One test ship is a proof of concept. Britain operates over 9,000 merchant vessels, plus hundreds of Royal Navy warships. Every single one needs degaussing, and ships keep arriving daily. American freighters, Canadian escorts, requisitioned trawlers. The queue never stops growing. Goodeve does the math, and it's terrifying. Each ship requires approximately 2,000 feet of thick copper cable. That's over 18 million feet for the merchant fleet alone, enough to wrap around Earth's equator. Britain's copper supplies are already strained. Now Goodeve needs an entire additional supply chain just for degaussing cable. Then there's installation. You can't hire any electrician off the street. Cable placement must be precise. Wrong positioning and the field won't cancel the hull's magnetism. Too much current, you risk fires. Too little, the ship stays vulnerable. Each installation requires trained personnel who understand electrical engineering and naval architecture. Britain doesn't have those people. Every qualified engineer is already working 16-hour days on radar, aircraft engines, gun systems. Goodeve needs to create an entire workforce, train them in weeks, deploy them worldwide. The Admiralty establishes degaussing stations at major ports: Portsmouth, Liverpool, Glasgow, Belfast, Cardiff. Each station gets equipment, cable supplies, hastily trained crews. Ships arriving in port are immediately measured, calculations made. Cable wound, generators installed. The whole process takes about 48 hours per ship if everything goes perfectly. It never goes perfectly. Ships arrive damaged and need repairs first. Cable shipments get delayed, generators malfunction, workers make measurement errors and start over. And through all this, U-boats are still hunting outside the harbors, waiting for degaussed ships to emerge. Goodeve realizes he needs a faster solution for the massive backlog. His team develops something called wiping. Ships steam slowly past shoreline installations where massive electromagnets temporarily neutralize their fields. It's not permanent like proper degaussing, but it lasts several weeks. Wiping stations go up at harbor entrances, processing multiple ships per day instead of one every 2 days. By March 1940, Britain is degaussing ships faster than Germany can lay magnetic mines. But it's a desperate race. Speed becomes everything. Goodeve's operation transforms from a small experiment into the largest crash engineering project in British history. By April, degaussing stations operate around the clock. 3 shifts 24/7. Sparks fly from welding torches at midnight. Exhausted electricians measure magnetic fields at dawn. Cable crews work through air raids ignoring sirens. Because every hour a ship sits waiting is an hour it can't carry desperately needed supplies. The Admiralty pulls workers from anywhere they can find them. Retired electricians called back. University physics students drafted straight from lecture halls. Women joined degaussing crews in unprecedented numbers, operating magnetometers and calculating cable patterns, work that requires precision and mathematical skill, not brute strength. By summer 1940, over 3,000 people are working degaussing operations across Britain. The logistics are mind-bending. Cable arrives by the ton, wound on massive reels. It's thick as a man's thumb, weighs several pounds per foot. Getting it around a ship's hull means lowering crews on scaffolding along the vessel's sides, securing cable with brackets every few feet, making sure connections are waterproof. On a large freighter, installation takes a full day of grueling labor. Then comes testing. After installation, every ship must be measured again to verify the degaussing works. Ships steam slowly through designated areas while shore-based magnetometers record their signatures. If readings are still too high, crews go back and adjust current, reposition cables, troubleshoot. Some vessels require 3 or 4 attempts. The program expands beyond British shores. Canada establishes degaussing stations in Halifax and Montreal. American ports, technically neutral until December 41, quietly set up facilities for ships joining British convoys. Gibraltar, Alexandria, Cape Town, Bombay, anywhere Allied shipping concentrates, degaussing equipment follows. Goodeve's team writes training manuals, ships equipment overseas, trains foreign crews. But ships keep dying. June 1940 brings catastrophe on multiple fronts. France falls, giving U-boats access to Atlantic ports like Brest and Lorient, cutting 450 miles off their hunting range. Suddenly, German submarines can stay on patrol much longer, hitting convoys farther from British shores. And while thousands of ships now have degaussing protection against magnetic mines, they're still vulnerable to torpedoes in open water. The Admiralty faces brutal triage decisions. Prioritize warships or merchant vessels. New ships or older ones. Fast ships that can outrun U-boats or slow cargo haulers carrying the most tonnage. Every choice means some ships wait longer, stay vulnerable longer, face higher risk. Goodeve's crews work through the Blitz. London's docks burn from German bombing raids, but degaussing continues. Liverpool takes devastating hits in May 41. Over 2,000 civilians killed, port infrastructure battered. But the degaussing station keeps operating. Glasgow, Belfast, Cardiff all endure air raids while cable crews keep wrapping ships. By the end of 1940, Britain has degaussed over 4,000 vessels. By mid-1941, that number exceeds 10,000. It's an engineering achievement that rivals building the ships themselves. Except it's being done under wartime conditions with limited resources and constant enemy action. The numbers tell the story better than words. First 3 months of 1940, before degaussing became widespread, magnetic mines sink or damage 115 British ships in home waters. Late 1940, after thousands of vessels received protection, that number drops to fewer than 20 for the same period. By 1941, magnetic mine losses become almost negligible, less than a dozen vessels for the entire year. Goodeve's crazy idea has essentially neutralized Germany's wonder weapon, but saving ships from magnetic mines is only half the battle. The Atlantic itself remains a killing field. U-boats don't care whether a ship is degaussed. Torpedoes destroy hulls regardless of magnetic signatures, and 1941 becomes the most brutal year of the entire convoy war. Dönitz has over 100 operational U-boats by year's end, and his wolf packs are mauling convoys with terrifying efficiency. November 41 alone, 62 Allied ships totaling over 300,000 tons. Yet degaussing gives convoys something they desperately need: predictability. Before, merchant captains faced threats from multiple directions simultaneously: U-boats in deep water, magnetic mines in shallow water, air attacks near coastlines. Ships had to run gauntlets from the moment they left North American ports until they docked in Britain, with no safe zones anywhere. Degaussing eliminates one variable. Convoys can now focus entirely on the U-boat threat. Escort commanders don't worry about ships exploding in harbor approaches. Vessels can take evasive routes through shallow coastal waters where submarines can't follow, because magnetic mines no longer pose a threat there. Britain can concentrate defensive resources, destroyers, aircraft, radar stations, on anti-submarine warfare, instead of scattering them across multiple threats. The psychological impact is enormous. Merchant crews who've watched ships blow up in supposedly safe harbors now have confidence their degaussed vessels can actually reach port. Morale improves. Sailors stop refusing assignments. The steady drumbeat of mystery explosions that terrorized British shipping in late 39 and early 40 simply stops. Ships still sink, plenty of them, but at least crews know what they're fighting. By 1942, degaussing becomes so routine it's barely worth mentioning in naval reports. Every ship gets degaussed as automatically as it gets painted. New vessels are built with degaussing coils already installed. Liberty ships rolling off American production lines at 3 per day all include degaussing systems as standard equipment. What seemed impossible in January 1940 becomes normal procedure by 42. The Germans try to adapt. They modify magnetic mines with more sensitive triggers, attempting to detect even degaussed ships. They add acoustic sensors that respond to propeller noise. They combine magnetic and pressure detonators requiring both a signature and a pressure wave. But every adaptation requires new mine production, new deployment. And Britain's minesweepers, now that they understand the threat, become far more effective at clearing the weapons. The Battle of the Atlantic continues until May 1945. U-boats remain deadly until Germany's surrender. But the magnetic mine threat that nearly paralyzed British shipping in 1940 never recovers. Goodeve's solution holds. Ships continue crossing the Atlantic, keeping Britain fed, supplied in the fight. Not because they're invincible, because one less weapon can kill them. Charles Goodeve never becomes a household name. No monuments honor him. No Hollywood films dramatize his achievement. While codebreakers at Bletchley Park and radar scientists at Bawdsey Manor receive post-war recognition, the man who saved thousands of ships and tens of thousands of lives remains largely unknown outside naval engineering circles. That's often how war works. The most crucial innovations happen quietly, solved by people nobody's heard of, while headlines focus on battles and generals. But the impact of his work extends far beyond World War II. Degaussing becomes permanent naval doctrine for every major navy worldwide. Modern warships still use degaussing systems, though they've evolved into sophisticated computer-controlled installations that continuously adjust to changing magnetic conditions. Submarines use even more advanced technology to avoid detection by magnetic anomaly detectors. The same principles protect undersea cables, scientific instruments, sensitive electronics from magnetic interference. Goodeve's broader legacy lies in how he approached the problem. He didn't think like a naval officer bound by tradition. He thought like a scientist who understood that modern warfare increasingly meant fighting physics itself. Radar was turning air combat into an electromagnetic chess game. Sonar was making submarine warfare a battle of sound waves. Magnetic mines had weaponized Earth's own magnetic field. Victory would go to whoever best understood and exploited scientific principles. The Royal Navy recognized this shift. The Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development evolved into a permanent institution. Britain established closer ties between universities and military research. Scientists stopped being treated as eccentric outsiders and became integral to defense planning. Goodeve himself rose to become Director of Naval Land Equipment, then Controller of Research and Development for the Ministry of Supply. After the war, he received a knighthood and continued working on scientific problems until his death in 1980. But perhaps the most important lesson from degaussing is about institutional flexibility under pressure. The Royal Navy in 1940 was one of history's most tradition-bound organizations. Hundreds of years of customs, protocols, established procedures. Yet when faced with an existential threat, when ships were exploding and conventional solutions weren't working, the Admiralty gave a university professor with a wild idea the authority to rewire their entire fleet. That kind of institutional courage is rare. Think about what Britain accomplished in less than 2 years. They took a theoretical concept, proved it worked, scaled it to thousands of ships, trained thousands of workers, established global infrastructure, essentially solved a problem that threatened to starve the nation into surrender, all while fighting a war on multiple fronts, enduring bombing raids facing possible invasion, operating under conditions of absolute desperation. The convoys kept sailing. Britain survived, and though degaussing was just one factor among many, convoy tactics, escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft, code-breaking, sheer courage all played crucial roles. It eliminated one deadly threat at precisely the moment when Britain couldn't afford any more losses. Sometimes in war, the craziest idea turns out to be the right one. Sometimes wrapping ships in miles of electrical cable and turning them into electromagnets is exactly what saves a nation. And sometimes the hero isn't the admiral on the bridge or the pilot in the cockpit. It's a Canadian chemistry professor who understood magnetism better than anyone thought possible.